Could one man's failing health open the most dangerous crack inside Putin's entire system? And if that man suddenly disappears, who really commands the guns, the fear, and the loyalty in Chechnya? Before we go deeper, do this with me. If you like sharp, high-stakes breakdowns that cut through propaganda, tap like, subscribe, and share this video with one friend who follows Russia, Ukraine, or global power politics. For years, the world looked at Putin's biggest problem and saw Ukraine. Tanks, trenches, missiles, sanctions, maps. That is the obvious crisis. But power rarely breaks first at the place everyone is staring. It usually breaks at the weak joint that has been hidden for years. And in Putin's system, one of those hidden joints has a name: Ramzan Kadyrov. Chechnya is not just another region on a Russian map. For Putin, Chechnya is personal. It helped build his image. It helped sell the story that he was the man who could restore order after Russia's chaos in the 1990s. Chechnya was where he learned that brute force, fear, and a loyal local strongman could do what institutions could not. That lesson shaped his rule. And for more than 2 decades, Kadyrov was the man who made that lesson look successful. He ruled Chechnya like a personal kingdom inside the Russian state. Moscow sent money. Moscow looked away. In return, Kadyrov kept the republic quiet, crushed dissent, built a cult around himself and his family, and offered armed men whenever the Kremlin needed a show of force. It was an ugly deal, but for Putin it was useful, maybe even essential. Now that deal looks less stable than it has in years. Rumors about Kadyrov's health have circulated for a long time. But in the last 2 years, those rumors have become louder, more detailed, and harder to ignore. Independent outlets and analysts have pointed to repeated absences, visible physical decline, medical treatment, and growing urgency around succession. Some reports claim kidney failure. Others point to earlier reporting about pancreatic illness. Kadyrov denies serious problems, and the Kremlin does not confirm them. So we need to be careful here. But even when the facts are partly hidden, leaders tell you a lot through behavior. And Kadyrov's behavior has started to look like a man racing against time. That matters because his system was never built to survive him cleanly. To understand why, we need to go back. Chechnya broke Russia's pride in the 1990s. The first war ended in humiliation for Moscow. Then came the second war, and for Putin, that war became a launchpad. He presented himself as the man who would crush separatism, restore control, and never let Russia look weak again. But Moscow did not win Chechnya through force alone. It also won through betrayal, deals, clan politics, and the rise of the Kadyrov family. Ramzan's father, Ahmad Kadyrov, switched sides during the Second Chechen War and became Moscow's key local ally. He understood the local networks, the rival commanders, the religious dynamics, the grudges, the balance of fear. He gave the Kremlin something it did not have: a Chechen face for Russian control. When he was killed in 2004, Ramzan inherited more than a position. He inherited Moscow's trust, Moscow's money, and Moscow's permission to rule with almost no real restraint. That permission changed everything. Over time, Ramzan Kadyrov built a model that looked loyal to Russia from the outside but worked like his own machine on the inside. His allies spread through politics, security, business, religion, and family structures. His enemies were intimidated, jailed, exiled, or worse. Human rights groups documented abuse for years, but Putin kept backing him because Kadyrov delivered what the Kremlin valued most: order without the need for direct Russian micromanagement. That is why this moment is so dangerous. When a normal regional leader weakens, the state can replace him. When a personal ruler weakens, the whole hidden architecture around him starts shaking. And that hidden architecture is not small. Chechnya today is tied to a large network of armed formations that are formally part of Russian structures, but often described as personally loyal to Kadyrov. Estimates differ. Some analysts put the number of forces under his influence above 20,000. A recent memorial-based report cited by OC Media pushed that figure above 30,000, while other reporting has focused on roughly 20 to 25,000 men as the politically relevant core. The exact number matters less than the point. This is not a symbolic guard force. It is a serious armed ecosystem. Some of these units have played propaganda roles in Ukraine. Some have carried out policing and rear area functions. Some have fought. Some have reportedly clashed with regular Russian forces or drawn deep resentment from other Russian soldiers. And all of them exist inside a chain of loyalty that is far more personal than institutional. That is where the fear begins. Because if Kadyrov fades, is removed, or dies, the question is not just who sits in his chair. The question is who controls the men with weapons, who controls the money flows, who controls the family network, and who can make rival factions believe they will survive the next week. That is not a normal succession issue. That is a possible power shock. And the most revealing sign that the regime itself understands the danger is this. Kadyrov has been pushing his children into public roles at unusual speed. That is one of the clearest clues that the problem is urgent. In highly personal systems, leaders usually avoid naming heirs too early, especially in violent political cultures. The reason is simple. The moment you signal weakness, you invite ambition. Rivals start counting allies. Loyalists start hedging. Friends start wondering whether they should remain friends. Yet despite that risk, Kadyrov has elevated his sons in ways that feel less like long-term grooming and more like emergency preparation. His son Akhmat has taken on bigger political visibility. His son Adam has been placed in powerful security-related roles and heavily promoted in state media. Adam, in particular, became infamous after the publicized beating of a detainee accused of burning a Quran. Instead of being punished, he was praised and rewarded. That was not just family favoritism. It was a political message. The regime was presenting him as a hard, fearless, untouchable heir figure. But there is a problem, a big one. Under Russian law, the head of a federal subject must be at least 30 years old. Kadyrov's sons are far younger than that, so even if Ramzan wants a dynasty, the legal road is blocked in the short term. That means any real transition would likely require a regent, a caretaker, or some collective structure that protects the family until one of the sons is old enough. And now the field of possible stand-ins becomes very important. Several names keep returning. Adam Delimkhanov is one of the most serious. He is not just another loyalist. He is deeply tied to the Kadyrov machine, has influence far beyond Chechnya, and is widely seen as one of the most powerful figures in Ramzan's orbit. He is seasoned, feared, networked, and useful. If Moscow wanted continuity without openly handing Chechnya to a child, Delimkhanov makes obvious sense. Then there is Magomed Daudov, another longtime insider, often described as one of the regime's hardest enforcers. He has been central to the machinery of power and is sometimes discussed as a logical transitional figure. He is not necessarily the most charismatic player, but succession in this kind of system is not about charisma alone. It is about enforcement, clan balance, and whether powerful men think you can protect them. Apti Alaudinov also appears in succession discussions. He has a war profile, a national audience, and stronger links to the broader Russian military and security world. That could help him with Moscow, but it could also create friction inside Chechnya if local elites see him as too close to outside security agencies and not rooted enough in the delicate internal balance. Notice what all these names have in common. They tell us the same thing. Even when the talk is about family, the real issue is force. And force is why the Kremlin cannot treat Chechnya like a simple regional appointment. Because once you strip away the speeches and ceremonies, Chechnya is still a place where authority has to feel real every single day. It has to be seen in convoys, in security details, in patronage, in fear, in who gets protected, and in who disappears from public life. That means succession is not just about legal paperwork, it is about performance. The next ruler has to look strong before he is strong. He has to seem feared before he is feared. He has to convince armed men, clerics, family networks, and Moscow, all at once, that backing him is safer than testing him. That is an almost impossible standard for a young heir or a temporary stand-in. If you're still with me, here's your second mission. Don't just watch this silently. Drop a comment with the one name you think Moscow fears most in a Chechen succession fight. And if this analysis is giving you real value, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Putin's whole Chechen arrangement has always depended on a strange contradiction. He centralized Russia. He crushed independent political centers. He made governors weaker. He tightened Moscow's grip almost everywhere. But in Chechnya, he allowed the opposite. He let one man build a semi-autonomous personal system because it was cheaper and safer than ruling the republic directly. That double standard has always carried risk. It told every other regional elite in Russia that loyalty could be rewarded with extraordinary freedom, but only in rare cases, and only when the Kremlin felt trapped enough to need it. Chechnya became both a solution and an exception. It looked stable only because the exception kept working. Now imagine what happens if the exception stops working while Russia is still fighting a grinding war in Ukraine. This is why Kadyrov's health matters far beyond Grozny. The Kremlin is already under military strain. It is under economic pressure. It is managing casualties, sanctions, internal fatigue, and elite tensions. In that environment, the last thing Moscow wants is a messy power transition in the North Caucasus. Not in a region with a history of insurgency. Not in a region built on clan loyalties. Not in a region where memory of war is still alive under the surface. Chechnya is quiet, but quiet is not the same as healed. Many of the forces that Kadyrov suppressed did not disappear because they accepted the legitimacy of his rule. They disappeared because resisting him was too dangerous. That is very different. Personalist stability often looks strong until the central enforcer weakens. Then old enemies, wounded families, exiles, security rivals, and outside actors all start recalculating at once. And we already have signs that the image of total control is not as solid as it looks. In 2026, Ukrainian intelligence said it had run a long operation against Akhmat-linked forces in the Sumy direction with the help of an embedded source, intercepts, and targeted strikes. Kyiv's numbers cannot be independently verified in full, so again we should stay careful. But even the claim itself matters, because it points to something larger. Kadyrov's forces are not beyond penetration, not beyond internal leakage, and not beyond doubt. That matters psychologically. These units built a reputation around fear, image, and personal loyalty. If even part of that aura cracks, succession becomes more dangerous. Men follow strongmen not only because they are paid, but because they believe the strongman's future is bigger than their own. Once that belief fades, loyalty becomes a market. Then every question gets sharper. Will these forces follow a son who is too young to rule? Will they follow Delimkhanov if he emerges as the family's shield? Will they follow Daudov if he becomes the legal bridge? Will some shift toward Moscow if the Kremlin sends unmistakable signals? Will rival branches inside the wider security structure begin protecting themselves instead of the system? And perhaps most dangerous of all, will different armed groups answer those questions differently? Because that is how controlled fear turns into fragmentation. There is another piece here that many people miss: money. Kadyrov's machine is not powered only by guns and intimidation. It is also powered by federal money. Chechnya depends heavily on transfers from Moscow. OSW noted that federal support made up the overwhelming majority of the republic's budget revenue in 2024. That means any successor inherits not just a throne of fear, but a system of dependency. This gives the Kremlin leverage. But leverage is not the same as control. In theory, Moscow can pressure any new Chechen leader through funding. In practice, using that leverage is risky. Cut the money too hard, and you destabilize the republic. Keep the money flowing, and you may keep financing a semi-autonomous machine you no longer fully trust. The Kremlin does not get a clean option here. It gets a trade-off. That trade-off should sound familiar, because Russia has already lived through a warning about semi-independent armed structures. Wagner. Prigozhin's mutiny shocked the system because it revealed that a force built for the Kremlin could also turn into a problem for the Kremlin. Chechnya is not Wagner. The history is different. The local roots are deeper. The political culture is different. But that can make the risk even more serious, not less. Wagner was a mobile mercenary structure. Kadyrov's system is rooted in territory, kinship, and long memory. If a crisis ever comes, it will not look the same. It may not be a dramatic highway march toward Moscow. It could look messier, quieter, and more dangerous. Elite bargaining, armed pressure, selective violence, internal purges, loyalty tests, and a tense standoff over who speaks for Chechnya in Putin's name. That is why the word mutiny matters here. But we should use it carefully. The most realistic danger is probably not a clean, open rebellion with flags and declarations on day one. It is a loyalty fracture, a partial refusal, a split chain of command, a situation where armed men remain officially loyal to Russia, but are unofficially waiting, hesitating, bargaining, or choosing family over federal orders. And in war, even hesitation can become a strategic event. Think about the timing. Russia is fighting in Ukraine. Chechen formations remain part of that wider war effort. If the command picture inside Chechnya becomes uncertain, that affects not just local power, but also deployments, coordination, morale, and political symbolism. A weakening Kadyrov means Putin has one more moving part he has to hold in place. And Putin's system was designed to project certainty. It was never designed to look like it was improvising. So what might Moscow actually do? The first option is continuity for as long as possible. Keep Kadyrov in place, deny everything, flood the media with staged appearances, and buy time. That is the easiest short-term path, especially if his condition allows him to remain visible from time to time. It preserves the fiction that nothing fundamental has changed. The second option is managed insider succession. In other words, Kadyrovism without Kadyrov. Choose a loyal replacement from inside the existing machine. Preserve the key networks, reassure the armed structures, and avoid public rupture. This is where names like Delimkhanov or Daudov become especially important. The third option is informal family rule with formal adult supervision. A regent governs, while the sons remain the symbolic future. This would try to preserve the dynasty until the legal barrier disappears. It sounds neat on paper. In reality, regencies are dangerous because the temporary guardian often discovers he likes power very much. The fourth option is the one Moscow fears most: systemic rupture. That means elite fragmentation, local unrest, growing resistance, security conflict, and a reopening of questions the Kremlin has spent years burying. And here's the part that gives this story real historical weight. Chechnya has risen against Moscow before, more than once, and usually at moments when the empire around it looked weaker than usual. That does not mean a new independence war is guaranteed. It is not. Many Chechens may want peace more than anything else after decades of violence. Many elites may prefer bargaining to chaos. Many people may fear what comes after Kadyrov more than they hate the current system. But history matters because it shapes imagination. When central power looks shaky, old possibilities return to the mind. Exiles notice. Underground networks notice. Regional rivals notice. Foreign intelligence services notice. Fighters who once believed the window was closed start wondering whether it is opening again. That is why Ukraine watches this closely too. Anti-Kremlin Chechen fighters already exist on the Ukrainian side. Kyiv understands that any instability inside the Russian system can relieve pressure on the battlefield. Even if no immediate uprising happens, the mere threat of distraction helps Ukraine strategically. So now step back and look at the full picture. A regional strongman who was crucial to Putin's image appears weaker than before. A personalized family machine is being pushed toward succession before it is ready. Young sons are being elevated, but cannot legally take power. Veteran loyalists circle as possible protectors, regents or rivals. Tens of thousands of armed men sit inside networks that are only partly institutional. Moscow needs control but cannot impose it crudely without risk. The war in Ukraine continues to consume attention and resources. And beneath all of that sits a region with a violent memory and unfinished political questions. That is not a local story. That is a stress test for Putinism itself. And there is one more reason the Kremlin cannot shrug this off. Other republics inside Russia watch Chechnya too. They see the money Chechnya receives. They see the autonomy Kadyrov enjoyed. They see the way Moscow tolerated things in Grozny that it would never tolerate elsewhere. That creates resentment. But it also creates a lesson. If the Kadyrov model breaks badly, every regional elite will study why. Some will ask whether loyalty still brings protection. Others will ask whether Moscow's reach is weaker than it claims. In an empire-sized state, perception matters almost as much as force. A succession crisis in Chechnya would not stay inside Chechnya's borders in political terms. It would travel through conversations in governors' offices, security circles, business networks, and nationalist movements. It would tell every ambitious player in Russia that even the Kremlin's most protected arrangements can wobble under pressure. And once that doubt spreads, the Kremlin has to spend more energy reassuring everyone else that the center is still in command. That is expensive. It drains attention. It weakens the image of effortless control that Putin depends on. If this breakdown has changed how you see the whole Russia story, share it now before the algorithm buries it. And if you want more scripts that connect the hidden fault lines others miss, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next crack in this system may appear where almost nobody is looking. The biggest mistake outsiders make is to think Putin's system is strong because it looks centralized. But centralized systems built on personal bargains are often more fragile than they appear. They do not fail when every institution collapses at once. They fail when one bargain stops holding and suddenly exposes how much of the system was resting on one person, one clan, one fear, one unwritten promise. That is exactly what makes Kadyrov so important. He is not just a regional boss. He is proof of how Putin governs difficult territory, not by building trusted institutions, but by outsourcing control to men who can impose order through personal power. It works until the man ages, weakens, overreaches, or begins planning for life after himself. Then the bill arrives, and that bill is not only political, it is moral, military, financial, and psychological. Political. Because the Kremlin has to show it can manage succession without chaos. Moral. Because the whole arrangement exposed what Moscow was willing to tolerate in exchange for obedience. Military. Because armed formations shaped by one ruler do not automatically become neutral state servants. Financial. Because the system eats money even when it is supposedly stable. Psychological. Because fear loses power the moment people sense it can be survived. That last point may be the most important of all. Strongmen often look unbeatable right up until the day they stop looking inevitable. Once inevitability disappears, every person under them begins a private calculation. Officials ask who can protect them next. Security men ask who will pay them next. Rivals ask whether old debts can be settled. The public asks whether silence is still the safest option. Even Moscow asks itself the question it never wants to ask out loud. What if the man we relied on has become the risk we feared? That is why Kadyrov being out of time is bigger than one man's illness. It is about whether the Kremlin can keep controlling a republic that it never truly normalized, only outsourced. And if it cannot, the consequences will not stay politely inside Chechnya. They will echo through Russia's military, its internal security system, its regional politics, and its image of control. Putin built his brand on ending chaos, but history has a cruel sense of humor. Sometimes the very tools a ruler uses to crush disorder become the source of the next disorder. So when people ask whether Chechnya could become Putin's next headache, I think that question is too small. The real question is this: if Ramzan Kadyrov can no longer hold together the fear, the family, the money, and the fighters, can Putin still claim he holds together Russia? Because once a ruler depends on private loyalty more than public institutions, every succession becomes a test. And some tests do not begin with a dramatic explosion. They begin with whispers, disappearances, emergency promotions, forced smiles, and armed men waiting to see which way power moves. That is the moment Chechnya may be entering now. Not a guaranteed mutiny, not a certain collapse, but a dangerous countdown. And countdowns are most frightening when nobody can see the clock, but everyone knows it is ticking.